Whenever you introduce somebody like this guy, you look for the superlatives and salient points, and you don't have to look too far to find him. He's a broadcast journalist par excellence. Many Sundays you'll hear him on Coast to Coast. But even more than that, he's got fire in the belly to get the real story as opposed to just the first story that falls to hand. Join me in extending a most warm welcome here, Mr. George Knapp.
Thank you, everyone. So let me start off by apologizing. I forgot my suit and tie. Actually, I didn't forget it. I didn't want to bring it, and Tim said it was okay. So I've always wanted to make a presentation dressed like this, because this is how I dress at home most of the time when I'm not at work. And besides, I'm in an alien parade today, so I don't want to be wearing a suit and tie. It's terrific to be invited back here, to McMinnville. I started lobbying to be re-invited back here about a minute after I finished the presentation the last time I was here. Lobbying isn't the right word, groveling is more like it, because it is so much fun. I retired from the UFO conference scene more than 3 years ago. I just had enough of it. You go to the same conferences, there's the same people presenting the same stuff, and it was a waste of my time. And then you get into all the arguments with the crazies who are committed to this position or that conspiracy, and I had enough. So I said, that's it. But I knew at the time that there was one conference that could bring me out of my underground bunker, one conference that would get me back on the scene, and that, of course, is the Tahiti UFO conference. But the Tahiti folks haven't called, so actually McMinnville is the one. I mean, this is the most fun conference, and I've been to them all over the world for the last 30 years. There's nothing close. There's nothing close to it. It's so much fun. The attitude of the folks who are here is so healthy and inquisitive, and I have been trying to convince Tim to go ahead and start an I-team of his own so I could move to McMinnville. McMinimans, they save old buildings and restore them. That's a passion of mine. They make beer, they make wine, they roast coffee, and they put on a UFO conference. I need to work for these folks. So it's an exciting time for the UFO topic. Big things are underway. I think my friend Jeremy Corbell was talking about it the other night, for those of you who are here, about all these different acronyms and programs. And if you think about, I know it seems like progress is slow and we get frustrated that more information doesn't come out about UFOs in general, but wow, a lot of stuff has happened here since last October. Last October, on a stage in Seattle, a guy named Lou Elizondo stepped forward and said, the fact is the US government has been studying UFOs. It never stopped in 1969, as we were told when Project Blue Book ended. Of course they've been studying it. There are intrusions over national security facilities, encounters with US military. So we've always suspected that they were studying it. And Lou came forward and said, not only are we studying it, but I was in charge of it, and I resigned because it's not getting enough of a priority. That's a really big deal. And then 2 months after that, in December, the New York Times breaks a story about the program that Lou had been in charge of. They kind of confused things a little bit about the $22 million that had been spent by the Pentagon, because in fact that money had gone to another program, ALSAP, that has distinct connections to Las Vegas, as all UFO stories seem to have. There is a trail of breadcrumbs from just about any UFO story you could imagine, not only to Las Vegas and Bob Bigelow, but also to SKINWALKER Ranch, which we'll be talking about today. In addition to the revelations about ATIP and ALSAP, there's a lot of other information that's been dribbling out. We did a story last night, you didn't see it because it's in Las Vegas TV, but about the Tic Tac UFO. Those videos were released. People complained about them, which is what we UFO folks do. They're too grainy, they're not long enough, we don't know what it is, and maybe it's a bird, maybe it's a balloon. Well, it's not a bird, and it's not a balloon, and it's not another airplane, it's something from somewhere else. It does things that we can't do. And I was able to release a report that was written for the DIA and the Pentagon that analyzed all the sensor data that shows beyond any question that these craft do things that we can't do. It's an exciting time. I know there is frustration in that we want more information. In fact, we want all of it, and we want it now. It's coming, if you think about the progress that's been made in the last 8 months, it's just incredible. As I said, I think all roads, one way or another, lead to Las Vegas and to SKINWALKER Ranch, which is in Utah, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I don't think I'm exaggerating in saying that it is the strangest place on Earth, at least the strangest place on Earth that has been studied. It is the most intensely studied paranormal UFO hotspot in the world. And it hasn't just been studied once, it's been studied twice, which we'll cover tonight. Robert Bigelow, he's described as shadowy billionaire, CIA front. He's in the tea business, he's a casino owner, he's a drug runner, all kinds of crazy stories, has spent more money pursuing UFOs, paranormal, psychic phenomena than any person in the history of the world. And he bought this property, and we're going to get into why he bought it in a couple of minutes. But he installed scientists on there he owned it for 20 years. The scientists were there for 7 or 8 years, 24/7. Either they were there or had cameras there, and they tried to figure out what the heck was going on. This place has a history of really strange activity, and they were doing what scientists are supposed to do. And they basically have caught nothing but grief for it ever since. It is a UFO hotspot. This is a UFO conference based on, the McMinnville photos and the legacy of this area. And so we will talk about UFOs, but this is not really a UFO story. It's much bigger than that, much broader. And the reality of what happened at that ranch, at that property, suggests that there is a connection between UFOs and a lot of other things that people categorize as paranormal. What that connection is, well, maybe we can explore that together to try to figure it out. It's almost like the UFOs are the shiny bauble that is used to sort of lure us into the dark forest where other kinds of murky beings reside. So I wrote a book about it with Colin Kelleher in 2005. It's called Hunt for the Skinwalker, which is the same title as Jeremy's film that we'll get into in a moment. And the reason I wrote the book is actually I'd started the project as a documentary film. Bob Bigelow bought that property in 1996, which we'll get into further in a moment, and basically shut it down. He had his scientists in there, and they were not releasing information. They didn't want it to be overrun by UFO folks or crazy people or whatever. They wanted to be able to study it, and they expanded the study and tried to get information from people who live in the general area, but they didn't really want to publicize it. Well, I'm hearing all this information as it goes along because I'm friends with Bob and got to know his staff at NIDS, and so I'm seeing all this wild stuff that's going on, but I can't tell anybody about it. And around 2000, they allowed me to start visiting the property. I brought along a photographer each time we'd visit, and we would shoot interviews with the scientists who are working on the project, with neighbors, with eyewitnesses who had seen strange things, documenting what I thought would be a really great film. Around 2003, after I'd made several trips there, Bigelow the word about the ranch is kind of getting out. They're being overrun by trespassers and drunks and partiers and UFO crazies. And so he said, please don't put that out. So I didn't. So I buried it. And we had the tapes and all the materials in boxes. But I kept pestering them, much as Jeremy has pestered me, that I really would like to get it out someday. Around 2003, the activity at the ranch had declined to such a degree that the NIDS folks, Bigelow and Dr. Colin Kelleher, had figured, well, what do we got to lose? We'll let you go ahead and write some articles. Not do the documentary, but write some articles without any photos from the place so you don't make it easier for people to find it. And I did, and we put them in a little newspaper, a weekly paper in Las Vegas. And this thing went all over the world. Suddenly these stories were out that people did not know. They'd heard some of it. There had been some news reports back in 1996 about cattle mutilations and lights in the sky. But the kinds of things that were described in that report were way, way beyond standard UFOs and cattle mutilations, really, truly bizarre stuff that we're going to talk about today. And then in 2005, Bigelow said, well, go ahead and release the book. The idea was NIDS hoped that by having some publicity about these kinds of hotspots, that we might get some input from other places, other people in other regions that would say, hey, we've got something similar to that here. Why don't you guys come and investigate? And then NIDS would have something else to do. We did get information, or they got information about it, but it never led to any further studies. The teams would go out and look at these other hotspots, Yakima, Sedona, Dulce, New Mexico, for example, and they spent a lot of time on the ground, but it never evolved into the kind of study that happened at the SKINWALKER Ranch. So NIDS folded its tent. The organization dissolved in right around 2004, 2005, because the activity at the ranch had gone underground. What we learned later, though, and I was not able to talk about this either, is that a new study began in 2008, and it was funded by you. It was funded by American taxpayers. And it was conducted at the suggestion of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. And so for a couple of years there, government-funded investigators, some of the same people who had worked for NIDS, were on the property investigating the paranormal, UFOs, and a whole bunch of other stuff that are way beyond what you would think a normal UFO or government study would be interested in. I want to give you a sense of, sort of a sense of what the ranch is like. The book that we put out, it had no photos for reasons that I just mentioned, and the documentary project that we started long ago was shelved. Jeremy Corbell has been pestering me for a long time to maybe revive it, and when Bob Bigelow sold the property in 2016 and a new owner came in, I was sort of relieved of my promise that I wouldn't put this stuff out. So we started working on it. It's the new film. We're proud of it. It's not out yet, but will be soon. It's 2 films. It's the story of the original stuff that I shot and never showed to anyone, and it's also the new stuff that Jeremy has acquired interviews with people who would never come forward before, and it's kind of exciting. So I want to show you a clip that gives you a sense of where we're heading here.
It was dead night. Then out of nowhere, that weird flash.
Can you see that? Look at that. That's amazing.
That's not possible. That is not possible.
There is some kind of intelligence operating here.
And you're not allowed to talk about it. This is like the Area 51 of the paranormal.
So many things have happened on the properties that have not been made public.
Going public now.
It is perhaps the most important scientific effort of our time.
The Pentagon and CIA, they've been investigating encounters with the paranormal at the ranch.
We're talking about unidentified flying objects, UFOs.
The program received more than $20 million for its work.
This is a potential threat, a grave one to our country.
And everybody who lives there knows about it.
Something is here. Something that the government's doing.
Right above my head, and I could hit it with a tennis ball.
The Skinwalker is extraterrestrial.
They should not have vanished, but they vanished.
We are on the eve of something momentous.
Well, I needed the fingers to be pointing toward SKINWALKER Ranch.
Declassified videos, authentic Department of Defense footage published in December.
Oh my gosh. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Wow. Look at the flag. Oh my gosh, dude. Oh my God.
So that's a little taste of what the film's going to look like. And some of the things that are in that, and some of the things that we'll talk about today and over the next 2 hours, I've never been able to talk about in public before because the Bass thing was secret. You know, it was a government project, and while I was aware of it because of my friendships with the people who were involved, I didn't have to sign anything. No one was going to throw me in jail, but I would violate a confidence, which for a journalist, that's your stock in trade. That's how you learn stuff. People tell you things on the condition that you don't spill it immediately, and that has served me very well over the years. And the story about the ranch, I mean, I knew about it since 1996. I never went public till 2003. The story of the Bass study, I had known about it since it started around 2008, actually a little bit in 2007, but we didn't make it public until this year. So sometimes just by being patient and hanging on, you get to learn a lot of stuff. People tell you stuff if they think they can trust you. And I know that puts me in a category of being in league with the evil cabal government or something, but you know, I'll deal with that somehow. I thought I would tell you some stories that we have not discussed in public, and some stories that I have told in public before, because not everyone here, I think, has heard about the ranch. But in 1994, the property in question had been vacant for 7 years. No one had lived on it. We'll show you what the ranch looks like here in a little bit, but this family moved in. We call them in the book the Gormans. Their real name has been well known. It's been released by other people. The reason that we stick with it is because we made an agreement. The NIDS guys had made an agreement. They weren't going to use the real name. They weren't going to tell anybody, and I honored that agreement. So in the book, when Colin and I wrote it, we didn't use their real name. You could find it if you wanted to look for it. We stuck with Gorman. So that's the name I'm going to use, even though some of you may know what the real name is. Dad is an educated man, college educated. He's an expert in Simmental artificial insemination, raising these special cattle. He's an expert marksman and hunter, just a real solid guy. His wife, we call her Ellen, I think, in the book, is the vice president of a bank in town, also educated, smart, solid as a rock. The two kids were both straight A students, a boy and a girl, just a solid family. They buy this property in northeastern Utah, and it's their dream property. It's 480 acres. It's a beautiful place, and they are unloading their stuff on the very first day on the property. They have some calves in the corral, and they look out across the pasture, and they see this large beast. It's a canine. Is it a dog? They're looking at it, trying to figure it out. No, it's a wolf. We didn't know there were wolves in this part of the country. This thing starts walking toward them. It's head down. It's being very docile. They figure, this must be somebody's pet. This must be somebody's pet wolf. And it gets closer and closer to them. And as it does, I think one of them brushed it, and it had rained that day, so there was a wet dog smell, they recall. And this thing was gigantic. I mean, the rancher's about my size, and the back of this wolf came up this high, so it was huge. And it's walking between the family and acting like a pet, and then it spots one of these calves that made the mistake. Most of the calves are huddled back on the side of the corral. They see this wolf. One of them made the mistake of sticking its snout through the bars, and this wolf springs into action and chomps down on this calf and starts trying to drag it out of the corral. Why don't we play this clip? This is Colin Kelleher, the main investigator on in the NIDS study.
I put a couple of calves in this corral here, in this one here, and they saw this this wolf was just trotting across the field here from this direction, and it stopped occasionally. There was a light rain. It was a misty kind of a day with light rain. And so they were watching this wolf as it was coming towards them, and seemingly kind of unconcerned, the wolf stuck his head into the corral, grabbed the muzzle of the calf, in full view of these, tried to drag it out of the corral. The calf, was going wild. So Terry and his dad went over with stout sticks and started beating on the wolf to try to make sure that it let go the calf. Several times they beat on the wolf without any effect whatsoever. So Terry asked his son to go in to get a .357 Magnum. the sun came out and the wolf was still trying to drag the calf through the corral. And Terry sort of pointed the magnum at the animal and shot it. Now, as far as I remember, he shot it either 3 or 4 times, and it was like from increasingly close range. First of all, it was from several feet, and then it was closer and closer. On the 4th shot, the animal, I believe, let the calf go, but the animal the wolf didn't let out any yelps of pain. There was no sign of blood. There was no sign of distress. The animal let the calf go and looked at Terry. Terry gets the 30-06, which can bring down an elk, from a relatively long distance. Shot it at a distance of 20 feet, and this time there was a big recoil from the animal. The animal kind of recoiled, but still didn't give out any pain or anything like that, but kind of backed off for maybe 10 feet, 15 feet, and Terry shot it it was actually a 6th time with the 30-06, and this time he saw a bunch of flesh. That the bullet exited from the animal with flesh, and this time the animal just kind of turned on its heel and just trotted off, almost casually, and exactly where it had come from, across in that direction. Now, the piece of flesh was lying on the ground, and they examined it later.
So they beat it with sticks. It doesn't react. They shot it 4 times with the .357. I own one of those. Those are pretty powerful handguns. It doesn't do anything. It stops and just looks at them. Shoot it twice with the hunting rifle, 30-06. Chunk of flesh and fur falls off, but the animal is not in any other kind of distress, and it just trots off onto the southern side of the property. And on that side of the property, there's these big trees and brush, and on the opposite side of that, then further, is a river, and it gets muddy. So the rancher and his son are thinking, geez, this is a big, powerful animal that's wounded. We got to go after it. They grab another hunting rifle, and they go after it. And it wasn't hard to track the wolf, because in the muddy ground, it was heavy. It probably weighed 200 pounds, and it was leaving tracks that went into the mud 2 inches deep. So they're tracking it. Occasionally, through the brush, they see a glimpse of the animal. It walks into what is a clearing. It's about 50 yards across. By the time the rancher and his son get to this clearing, they walk out. The tracks go right out into the middle of this thing and stop. It was as if this thing vanished into thin air. They go walking back to see the rest of the family. What are we going to tell them about this? Well, basically we're going to have to just get over it and move on. This is the first day they moved into the property. They go back and pick up the chunk of fur and flesh, and I guess they're not thinking like a forensic investigator or a UFO investigator, so they don't keep it. But this fur and flesh smelled like rotten meat, like it had been out in the sun for a couple of days. It was rotting. They didn't keep it, unfortunately. But so later, when the NIDS guys get there, I'm jumping ahead, but when the NIDS guys get there and hear this story, they prepared sort of like a photo lineup, like you would do for suspects in a criminal case. And they showed the family likenesses of different species of wolves. And they asked each of them independently, the 4 people, to pick out which one they had seen. And they all settled on the same one. And the one they settled on is a dire wolf. And it's been extinct for 10,000 years. And that wasn't the only time they saw this wolf. The wife, the mom, had another encounter at the front gate. And that'll show you in a moment later. This same wolf was in the company of 2 dogs. They're traveling as a pack. And the dogs had these giant, oversized heads. Just really weird animals, and weirder still that they'd be hanging out with this bulletproof wolf. So that's day one. That's day one on the property. And they're thinking, we just got to kind of move on, finish unpacking, and get on with this. Now, I'm going to tell you some stories today that you're not going to believe, and I'm okay with that. You don't have to believe it. I don't have an agenda. I don't know what the explanation for this stuff is. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else does either. We'll explore some possible connections towards the end, and we'll open it up with the questions. But No one can explain how that works or what that animal was or where it was from or some of the other creatures or experiences that I'm going to tell you about. Again, I don't expect you to believe it, but I'm telling you that this is how it happened, and the witnesses are telling us the truth. So the family moves in. Strange things start happening. Let me show you what the ranch looks like. Let's roll that. So this is Skinwalker Ridge. That's the northern side of the property. You can see it's a really beautiful piece of acreage, 480 acres. It's divided into 3 homesteads. And there is only one way in. There's only one way to get into the property. By the way, on the north side is something called Bottle Hollow. The whole thing is surrounded by Ute tribal land. I wish I had stolen that sign because it's gone now, but that's the opening gate. That's the gate that gets into the ranch. There's only one way in. It goes all the way through the 3 homesteads, and it's always locked. And that becomes important because of some of the events that I'm going to describe to you. The only way to get in that property is right there. And the ridge on one side, the river on the other, and this road. And it goes right by the ranch house. Now that's the ranch house where the family lived. When they first moved in, we could just freeze on that for a second. When they first moved in, they noticed that these giant stakes with big heavy chains were both at the front door and on the side door, as if the people who had lived there had these giant guard dogs. They also noticed that all of the doors had locks on both sides, bolts and locks. They noticed doors inside had locks on both sides, and cabinets had locks. It was like the people that lived there had been paranoid. Now, those folks, by the way, had been contacted, the family that lived there before, and, well, they have no idea what we're talking about, paranormal stuff. They don't remember anything like that. We'll get into that. So the family thought, that's kind of weird. It's like they're worried about keeping something out, and they're worried about keeping something in, and all these locks. But again, like with the wolf thing, they kind of just let it go. This is their dream property. They just got here. They're going to get on with it. These are some observation towers that were built by the NIDS team when they came in 1996. They had like dog runs. They would have dogs inside those runs, and then the observation decks, the team would go out in the pastures at night for observation, looking for UFOs or whatever. And the dog runs are some interesting stories about things that happened there. When they installed them, someone kept opening them. And the dogs, they'd put them in, and 5 minutes later, the dogs are out. They'd started putting locks on the gates, and then it happened anyway. The locks would disappear. There was a lot of trickster elements that happened that we'll get into. That's another shot of one of the dog runs. The NIDS team used the dogs as sort of biosensors because they could see and hear and sense things that before the humans who were with them would be aware that something was amiss or something was near. This is the middle homestead. There's 3 homesteads. Remember, this is the middle one. It's been long abandoned, and it looks like a scene from a horror movie, but it's just decayed over the years because nobody's lived there. But this is sort of the beating heart of Skinwalker Ranch, this property, this area, where the most unusual, the most intense, the weirdest, and most inexplicable events seem to occur. It was all sort of concentrated in this general area. This is the corral. This is the corral where the calves were, and where another incident happened involving bulls. See that white facility there? It's an old trailer that they used to store tools in, and there's only one door in, and they always kept it locked and locked with the big heavy wire around it, which will become a factor a little bit later. Yeah, that's the trailer. So that's a door that was created because of something that was inside that kicked it out. I'll tell you about in a little bit. That's what kicked it out, those bulls. So the family started having weird experiences that we would call sort of poltergeist kind of activity. And it was right from the get-go, right immediately. And, you know, UFOs are one thing, creatures that we'll get into in a bit. There's a lot of scary stuff that happened there. But the stuff that gives me little goosebumps is the poltergeist stuff. They felt that something was watching them the whole time they're there. And they weren't wrong. they started having inanimate objects became animated, and it happened almost every day. I got a chronology of all the events that they could remember, and they rattled off dozens of them. So frying pans and spatulas would move, and then the trickster started picking up the pace. Terry, the rancher, Mr. Gorman, is out in the field, is using a big post hole digger to dig holes to put posts for fencing. And it's a fairly heavy piece of equipment. He stops for a second, takes a drink of water, goes and wipes his brow, goes to the bathroom, comes back. His post hole digger is gone. Now, there's nobody out there. There's nobody else out there. He looks all over for the darn thing, finds it 3 weeks later, 25 feet up in a cottonwood tree. Just weird. His son is tasked with moving a cord of wood. He needed to move it 100 yards. He and his friends had done this to get it closer to the house where they're going to use it. They went in when they finished and had lunch, came back out. The whole cord of wood is moved back to the original spot. They did the same thing with fence poles. These are big, heavy fence poles. They had the son and 3 of his friends spent 4 hours doing this, moved all these heavy fence poles, and when they came back out, it had moved back to the original location, except it was just like an inch or 2 off, so they could prove the whole thing had been moved and back, but not to its original spot. Mom would take a shower every morning. She goes into the bathroom, she locks the door, she puts a towel and a hairbrush on the cabinet. She gets out of the shower, the door is still locked, towel and hairbrush are gone. They find the hairbrush later in the freezer. Mom goes grocery shopping. It's a ranch family, they buy a lot of food, so they don't have to go back and forth to town. She brings it home, takes all the groceries out of the bags and puts it in the cabinets, leaves the room, comes back, all the food's back in the bags. That kind of stuff is just happened to them all the time. They had a dog that they needed that had bad fleas, so they put a flea collar on it. And the very next day, the flea collar is gone. Well, dogs do that. They can do it. It's not that unusual. But the next day, it was back. Now, the dog didn't put it on there. A lot of stuff like that. And then they started, they felt that they were being watched, and they started seeing shadows and shapes in the windows, these tall, dark humanoid shapes outside the windows. They would hear heavy footprints outside the house. Then they started hearing the heavy footprints inside the house. And they started seeing the shapes inside the house. And then they started seeing the shapes at the bottom of their bed inside the house. And it freaked them out. They would go out at night, it's a beautiful and serene pasture, but they would hear voices coming from the sky above their heads, speaking a strange language in sort of a mocking tone, laughing at them, and they're looking up, they can't see anything. At night, the whole pasture would light up as if there was a giant spotlight in the sky, boom. Sometimes the light appeared to be coming out of the ground itself, just like a beam of light right out of the ground. They would hear sounds at night, and sometimes in the daytime, of machinery under the ground. They would feel the rumbling. They could hear metal on metal. It was like there was an underground steel mill or a railroad under there, and they couldn't figure it out. Now, the people who had lived there before, the Meyer family, when they added a weird thing to the deed. They wanted to insist that the new owners, before they do any digging on the property, they should let the Meyers know. They were subtly suggesting, don't be messing with the earth. And as we're going to learn a little bit later, it seemed like that was one of the activities that would stir stuff up. When you dug in the earth, they had an earth mover. The guy who's there now, they have an earth mover because it's a big ranch. You gotta move stuff around. And whenever they would do that, things would erupt. And it was hard to predict what. I'll do a little side story here. The first visit that I made, they invited me in part because I think they hoped that my inherent weirdness quotient might get something going. And so we went to the property, and the arrival of strangers, that'll get something going. Make a lot of noise out there, that gets the attention of whatever it is, and you dig in the dirt. So we did all that stuff. I was the stranger, we built a fire, we made a bunch of noise, did some interviews, then we got the earth mover and moved some dirt around, and then they put me on a chair in the middle homestead and left me there. And so, you know, they had a couple of instruments on me. They went a couple of hundred miles, a couple of hundred yards away, and were watching through different scopes and infrared binoculars and stuff to see if something came to get me. And I would like to tell you that I'm feeling very brave, and you know, I'm fine with it. Bring it on. Yeah, not really. I was thinking to myself, well, you know, UFO, that'd be great. I'd happy to see a UFO. Orbs, yeah, that'd be awesome. But there's some other things that I'm going to tell you about now that I don't want to really come into contact with. That night, however, there was nothing came to get me except mosquitoes. So, and I sat out there about 45 minutes, I think, and that's quite enough. So all of this strange stuff was going on, and strange, they felt that they were being watched, and it just seemed to get weirder and weirder. They had no idea about the area. And so the rancher starts asking around about it. This area, the Uinta Basin, has a history as a UFO hotspot. For as long as humans have lived there, people have been seeing strange things in the sky, what we would call UFOs. The first Europeans to cross that area, the basin, Father Escalante, 1776, leading Spanish missionaries, and they reported in their journals strange lights in the sky above their campfire. The Utes who have lived there, they have 15 generations back of stories that they tell about the sky people and objects in the sky and things on this particular piece of property. I'll just tell you about the Skinwalker legend. Now, it is a legend, it is lore, it is religion to Native American people. Skinwalker is not really something that the Utes believe in all that much, but the Navajo do. And back in the day, in the 1700s, 1800s, the Utes and the Navajo were at war. The Utes were a fierce, proud people, terrific horsemen, dangerous warriors, and they battled the Navajo. In fact, they aligned themselves with the Spanish and drove the Navajo out of their ancestral homes in Colorado. So the story about Skinwalker, which is how the title comes from, is that the Utes believe that the Navajo put a curse on them, that they sent a Skinwalker, and that ridge that we saw above the ranch, that is what is known as the path of the Skinwalker. So the tribe believed that people should not go there. There's no prohibition from it, but they had strongly advised tribal members to not go on that ranch, and that is still true today. Skinwalker, in the sense of what we're discussing today, is sort of an umbrella term that the tribe used to describe all the strange stuff that they had seen on that property over the decades, over the centuries. And it is also sort of a metaphor for the NIDS team to come, that whatever it is that's there seems to be a trickster, a shapeshifter, something that changes shape and form. It gives us glimpses of itself at times of its own choosing. It appears in different forms to different people. It is elusive, it is intelligent. Hunting it proved to be quite a daunting challenge. The Uinta Basin is beautiful, stark, it's rich in hydrocarbons, dinosaur bones. Until the big oil boom caused by fracking, it was about 90% Mormon, salt of the earth folks, LDS. The other 10% were the Utes. They were given a reservation at the end of the Civil War by Abraham Lincoln. The 8th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers, were sent there, built a fort, Fort Duchesne, to keep an eye on them, to keep the peace. Buffalo Soldiers are their own story, because it turns out that this particular group of cavalrymen were all Freemasons, steeped in the dark arts. And some of them are buried in the areas of Fort Duchesne that the Native Americans, the Utes, have built over. And they built these homes and dug up the ground to pour concrete foundations and found graves and uniforms of the Buffalo Soldiers who were buried there. So it's sort of like a Hollywood movie in reverse, you know, where we're always building haunted houses on Indian burial grounds. This is kind of the opposite side of that. The Utes have their own government. They have their own businesses. They're modern people. They generally coexist peacefully with the non-Utes in the tribe. For us as investigators, for NIDS, and then for us as filmmakers, we had a tough time breaking through to them and getting them to talk. They didn't trust us. It took a long time. Jeremy has made really great progress in the last year or so in gaining access to Utes, and we've been able to engage with them and hear a whole new level of stories about what's been going on there. In 1974, a guy named Frank Salisbury, Utah State University, wrote an excellent book called The Utah UFO Display. The use of the word display in his title is telling, I think, but it was because at that time, in the late 50s, all through the 60s, into the 70s, that basin, for whatever reason, was a UFO hotspot. More UFO sightings per capita than maybe anywhere in the country. And pretty much if you go there now, you would be hard-pressed to find somebody who hasn't seen one, or who has doesn't have a family member who's seen UFOs of all kinds of shapes and sizes. Why that particular area? No, we don't really know. A lot of Dr. Salisbury's information came from a guy named Junior Hicks. He spent his entire life there in the basin. He was the science teacher. He taught science to generations of school kids who live in the area. And as they would become adults or teenagers and see UFOs or weird stuff, they would go back to their science teacher, Junior Hicks, and tell him the story. And he started compiling all these files and cases. And he would drive through the properties and interview witnesses and put together an amazing compendium, thousands of cases that he looked at. The best 400 or so he gave to Dr. Salisbury, which formed the basis of this book. Junior Hicks is a pretty cool guy, and because he knew everybody growing up, they trusted him and told his story, so he got a lot of information, and he shared a lot of that stuff with us. Junior Hicks is the guy, the first time I met him on my first visit to the property, who told me that ridge is the path of the Skinwalker. And I got a little chill when he said it. I said, what's a Skinwalker? I'd never heard of it before. And he told me the story about the Utes and the prohibition, or rather the admonition against going there, and we've been working on that ever since. You know, I could talk all day about the Skinwalker, but in essence, it is a shapeshifter. It's an evil presence, a sorcerer. In order to become a Skinwalker, according to Navajo beliefs, you have to kill somebody, a member of your own family, and then you'll be able to morph into other animals and other shapes, a crow, a fox, a wolf. So it's an interesting idea, and maybe it seems quaint to some of us who do not share that particular belief or that culture, but the Utes take it very seriously, the Navajo take it very seriously, as evidenced by the fact that we tried to ask about it, even to tribal officials, to police officers, to academics. They didn't want to talk about it, because by mentioning Skinwalker, there was a concern that you invoke it. You invoke its name, you invite it into your life, and they take it very seriously because it's pretty scary. And it's scary in ways that, that transcend the tribe. They believed that the Navajo had put a curse on them, and that was what was unfolding on the Gorman Ranch. Now, the Gormans had no way of knowing this. They buy the property in 1994. They notice all the weird stuff, all the weird events that start happening, the shapes and shadows, the lights, the voices. Then they start seeing weird animals. In addition to the wolf incident from that first day, that was just the beginning. Ellen, as I mentioned, she saw something similar at the gate. They saw birds that would show up that looked like they were red. They came out of like the Amazon or something, that they're not native to that. They would show up. There were times when flocks of geese would be flying over the property, and they'd watch them, these giant V's of geese, Canadian geese, and as soon as they got over the ranch house, it was like they ran into an invisible pillar there, and they all scattered. Some of them fall out of the sky. Here's a weird one. One afternoon, Tom and Ellen arrive at the ranch after stopping in town. They see a commotion in the corral. Something's kicking up a lot of dust. As they got closer, they could see something is attacking their horses in the corral. And it's this big, heavy beast. It looks like a hyena, but it's muscular, low to the ground, with a big, furry, fox-like tail. And it's got claws, and it's scratching at the haunches of these horses that are jumping up and down. And it wasn't imaginary, because the horses were injured. The rancher jumps out of his truck, yells at this thing, and goes charging after it. It takes off out of the corral, goes up Skinwalker Ridge, jumps into a rock, and disappears. It's vanished. I'd never seen that before, and they can't identify what the heck that was, but its claws definitely left marks. Bulletproof wolves, strange animals, mystery voices, strange lights, poltergeist. What do you need after that? You need UFOs. So they started seeing a bunch of them. The first one they saw, it looked like an RV. It was at the third homestead, down at the other end of the property, and the rancher and his son are out at night, and they see what they think are headlights coming from the third ranch toward their house. They wondered, how the hell did this guy get down there in a Winnebago? He must be stuck. Let's go help him. So they start walking in that direction. The headlights start coming toward them. Then the headlights go up, up, and over the trees and out. And they described it, once it was in the sky, they described it as what UFO researchers would call a chupa. What was seen in Brazil for a lot of years, a big refrigerator-looking thing or an RV type shape. But it clearly was not a Winnebago. If it was a Winnebago, I'd like to buy one of those flying Winnebagos. Next, they started seeing these daylight sightings of silver discs. They saw classic flying saucers, except the one that they encountered generated an emotional response in them. And they were elated, almost giddy, like it was accessing something in their brain to mess with their emotions. Now, that wouldn't be the only time that happened. There were other craft and orbs and things that they saw that had the opposite effect. There were some UFOs that looked like stealth fighters that would float silently over the property. Ellen saw them first at the gate again, and they were ringed by what looked like Christmas lights or disco lights. There were a couple of times when they would just appear over Tom. He was out at night in the pasture, and then boom, there's one right there. He took to stalking them. He'd go out with a rifle at night. He was thinking it's the government doing this stuff, that the government is somehow trying to drive him off his land, so he'd get his gun, and he was ready to shoot one out of the sky. But he'd watch it, he'd hide. So these things are not omnipotent. They could be fooled. But he'd watch them floating around over the property, shining spotlights over the ranch at different spots. And it's cold the night that he's telling the story about, and he moves his knee and it cracks, and this thing reacts. It hears the crack and reacts and shines a light in his direction, and he took off. They started seeing all kinds of orbs. The first ones were these white things that would flit around. It's not fireflies. They were about the size of a softball, flitting around in the trees. Sometimes they'd hover. Sometimes they'd come toward them. Then they started seeing these red things, also orbs, that seemed designed to go after their animals, scared the hell out of their animals, would divide their cows, it would drive them off cliffs. And then the blue ones, the blue meanies. These things were bigger than a softball. They would get real close. They were looked like it was made out of glass, and inside of them was this bubbling blue liquid. No means of propulsion. They couldn't figure out how these things were flying. But when these things would get close, both to animals and to people, it would drive them to their knees with fear, just drive them crazy with fear, like it was accessing a flight or fight kind of thing in your head. Now, it's weird. They had seen a lot of weird stuff. They were kind of getting used to spooky, scary stuff. But this thing drove them literally to their knees and messed with them. They started having weird dreams. In addition to seeing the things outside the window, they would have the same dreams at night, the husband and wife, and then in these dreams, these beings in the sky are watching them and talking about them. And they said, oh yeah, Tom, he knows, he's aware we're here. When they wake up and they both tell the same dream again, they're upset about it. A couple of times they would wake up and they'd have these scoop marks on their hands and fingers. So that it's really trying to scare the hell out of them. I'll tell you what, they started, in addition to all these UFOs that they were seeing, their neighbors were seeing them. Sometimes sombrero-shaped objects that would fly right into Skinwalker Ridge, almost like it's a holographic projection of some sort. As Tom starts asking his neighbors, he finds out that pretty much everybody out there has been seeing them, and have been seeing them for a long time. And I guess he probably was wishing, why didn't somebody tell me that before I bought this property? They started losing animals, cattle. Now they've got 80 head in their herd, and these are expensive animals. And a lot of them started disappearing altogether. You could follow the tracks in the snow right into a snowbank, and then poof, they're gone, like they were snatched out of the sky. Then they started finding them that are cut up, classic mutilation stuff. The neighbor was having the same experience as Mr. Garcia. His cat, the one incident that he told me about was he had two cows that were in a special pen. He had them sequestered from the rest of the herd. He's in the house, and they're locked. There's no way they're going to get out. He's in the house, and he looks out, and both of them are outside the corral that he had created, outside the fence, and they're laying down. And he goes rushing out, what the heck is going on? These cows had, their legs were broken. Their front legs are both broken. How did this happen? It was, he goes back in the house. He's going to get a gun and take them down. He comes back outside. The cows are gone. They didn't walk. Their legs are broken. They're in severe pain. He goes back in the house, puzzled. An hour later, they're both back. He goes outside to see them. Now they've got 4. All of their legs are broken, as if they had been dropped from the sky. The Gormans lost a total of 30 head. And out of a herd of 80 animals, that's pretty bad. That's a significant loss. There was one particular mutilation incident that happened after the scientific team was there, and I think I want to show you that now.
The Gormans were especially sensitive to the incident with the bulls because of the losses they'd already suffered. Out of a herd of 80 cattle, they lost 14 head prior to the arrival of NIDS. Some disappeared, others were sliced up. 12 more cows and calves were killed while NIDS was on the ranch. Their neighbors, the Garcias, lost several animals as well. Some of their cattle appeared to have been killed by being dropped onto the pasture from a great height. The cattle mutilation mystery has been reported in at least 15 states dating back to the 1960s. Thousands of animals have been sliced up with surgical precision, mostly under the cover of darkness. If humans are doing it, not a single suspect has ever been caught. For the Gormans, the livestock losses were devastating, both financially and psychologically. And then things got worse.
On March 10, 1997, Tom Gorman and his wife walked out of their home and into the pasture, planning to tag the ears of several calves that had been born in the preceding days. It was a bright, clear morning. Snow was on the ground. 50 yards from their house, they found the first calf.
They were with their dog. The two of them tagged and weighed this animal. They checked it at, I believe it was 84 pounds or 87 pounds. And they left the animal there with the mother. Everything seemed to be fine, although they did detect an odor in the air around this area. They detected a strong musk smell. They took note of it, and then they headed west, and they went about 300 yards west beyond the dog run was not there at the time, but about 300 yards beyond, towards where that incline is, and they were tagging a second animal.
Only 30 to 40 minutes had passed. The Gormans had an unobstructed view of everything in the field, but didn't see or hear anything unusual until their dog focused its attention back toward the house and the first calf.
The dog with them down here at this stage began to act really strangely. It started growling, the hair on the back of its neck went up, and it started facing back towards here, growling and snarling, and then it just took off west, away from this spot. It just took off. It was never seen again.
The Gormans were curious and walked back across the field.
First thing they saw was the mother of the animal was running back and forth, kind of in a sort of half circle, from about this area to the fence line, just running back and forth, and it was limping. I mean, it was dragging its foot. It was limping. They met the animal, and they noticed that it was just totally out of breath. It was panting. It was obviously in deep stress, and it was dragging one leg.
And then they noticed the calf, or what was left of it.
Spread-eagled on the ground, just about here, with it was lying with all four limbs just spread on the ground. All of its internal body cavity was gone. It was completely, pretty well, all of its muscle was gone from the torso. The legs were still intact, but one of the ears was also gone. So they called NIDS.
The rancher placed a call to the NIDS investigators who'd returned to Las Vegas for a rare weekend off. Within a few hours, a four-man team, including a veterinarian, was on the scene.
Necropsy started, and the first thing that the veterinarian noticed during the necropsy was that the ear of the animal had been sliced off with a very sharp instrument. possibly a scalpel, and the ear had contained a very large plastic yellow tag, like an ear tag that they had just put on, and it was gone. So the necropsy proceeded. About 10 feet away from the animal, there was a femur. One of the femurs had been forcibly ripped out of a ball and socket joint, which is extremely difficult to do, I mean, in terms of strength. It looked initially, you know, superficially like a massive predator had just lain waste to this animal, removed, you know, 60 pounds of meat in 45 minutes, which we don't know of any predator that could have done that.
And how could a predator inflict such carnage without being seen or heard by the rancher, his wife, or his dog, who were a few hundred yards away in the same field on what was a quiet Sunday morning? No four-legged predator known to science could do it. The team gathered tissue and bone samples, which were sent to 3 independent pathology labs. The results arrived later, but confirmed what seemed obvious in the pasture that day. The calf had been carved up by someone wielding sharp, metallic instruments. A heavy machete-like object had slammed into the bones. A smaller scalpel-like knife had sliced the hide and muscle.
But closer inspection revealed that it was definitely sharp instruments used. There was no sign of blood. There was no sign of entrails around. It was perfectly clean. Not a drop of blood on the grass. We went even as far as doing an experiment by pouring blood on the grass to see how fast it would seep through. Videotaped the grass and showed, you know, even 2 days later you could still see the stain on the grass. So there was no blood whatsoever, not a single drop, either underneath the animal, on the animal, or on the grass. It was just completely clean.
A professional tracker was brought in. He scoured every inch of ground in and around the field, looking for tracks, human, animal, or vehicle. Nothing. Eventually, the investigators reached an unsettling conclusion.
The bottom line is this animal must have been killed elsewhere because there was no blood. There was no blood on the scene, and then the animal must have been brought back, laid down carefully, almost, you know, really almost ritually on the spot where it had been tagged.
The NIDS team investigated dozens of mutilation cases across the country. Many of the tissue samples were analyzed in NIDS' own lab in Las Vegas and then double-checked by independent labs they hired. The Utah calf was in a category all its own. It seemed akin to psychological warfare, intended to shock and frighten the witnesses. The following night, there was another scare in the darkness of the first homestead. Shots were fired at something that had rattled the herd. Eventually, Colm Kelleher surmised that the perpetrators responsible for the calf were mechanical, like an assembly line in a meatpacking plant. A machine was involved with this carnage.
Whatever happened to that calf was an extraordinarily skillful job.
So let me tell you about the shots that were fired. After this calf incident, everybody's pretty much on edge. We've kind of jumped ahead because I haven't told you about the NIDS arrival, but I'll get to it. So everyone's kind of on edge. Animals, the dogs, the people, everybody was kind of hunkered down and hiding. There was just a sense of foreboding on the property. And then the rancher hears these cows making noise, bellowing out in the first homestead near where this calf had been killed. He figures, I'm not losing another animal. And he grabs his rifle and jumps in his truck and takes off toward where the noise is coming from. 2 guys from NIDS, the scientists, jump in their car and they go after him, and they're videotaping part of it. The rancher jumps out of his truck. He sees 2 things. At the bottom of this tree is a really big round thing. Looks like a big hairy bear, except for it's a circle. And up in the tree is some eyes. And these eyes are like this big. And they're yellow in the tree above where the thing is at the bottom. He pulls out his rifle and pops this thing that's on the bottom, and he yells out, I hit it. And as soon as he hit it, it disappeared. Boom, like a balloon exploding. Then he starts shooting at the eyes in the tree, and he hit that too, because something, whatever it was, fell out of the tree. And at the bottom, there was still snow in patches in that area at that time of the year. And this thing, whatever it was, left a footprint in the snow. And it looked like claws. It looked like a raptor, like great big claws. The rancher and the 2 guys from NIDS go into the brush to look for it. There's no blood or anything, but that track, which they videotaped, told them that there was an animal of some kind there, like a dinosaur. And they went after it. They went into the brush with the guns in the dead of night out there looking for it. They never found it, I think, probably, thank goodness. I want to back up to another story that happened before. You saw the freeze frame of the bulls that were looking really surly and angry. Whatever this thing was, this intelligence, it was a trickster. It played mind games. It was always one step ahead of everybody. It could anticipate what the rancher and his family and what the scientists who eventually came there were going to do next. You put up a camera in an area where there's been a lot of activity, there's nothing happens there anymore, it moves over here. And it just played mind games. And the bulls is the example. You'll recall that corral with the white trailer in it. Well, the rancher and his wife are heading to the third homestead. They're in the truck. They've lost a bunch of animals. They're about ready to go under. And the rancher says to his wife, you know, if something happens to one of those bulls, we're done. They had 4 bulls, these 4 very expensive, 2,500-pound, powerful monster animals, and they're all in the corral that day. They drive down to the third homestead. They come back. They're gone 25 minutes. The bulls are gone. They're freaking out. They jump out, start looking around. How is this possible? There's nobody here. It's not rustlers. They couldn't get into the property, and if they did, these bulls are not easy to move around. They're looking all over the place, scrambling. The rancher goes over. There's a grate at the top of the trailer. Just on a whim, he looks inside. All 4 of the bulls are inside this trailer. They're crammed together. There's no way you'd need a forklift to get one of them in that trailer, and to get all 4 of them in that amount of time, crammed in there, and they were like in a trance. He yells to his wife, "Hey, I found them. They're over here." And when he yelled, they wake up and they start kicking the hell out of the sides of the trailer, and they knocked a hole in that. That's where you saw that big piece of wood in the side of the thing. And then they got out, and the photo that we showed, yeah, that's where they kicked it out and got out. But they were in a pretty bad mood for a while. Now, all right, I guess somebody could do a trick like that, but here's the other part of the mystery. The NIDS guys were not there that day, but the rancher called and told them about it. They flew from Las Vegas. They were there in a couple of hours. They start using instrumentation to see if they can detect anything, and the entire corral was magnetized. Like whatever technology or method was used to get those bulls, Murray uncooperative, mean animals, force them into that trailer, had somehow magnetized the entire corral, and it stayed magnetized for several hours. The funny thing is, the door had not been opened. There's a thing of wire that was still around it, so whoever got them in there didn't use the door. And there were even cobwebs on the inside of that door that were still there. So that's a pretty weird thing. And then to have the calf mutilation right after that, followed by the dinosaur, they're really messed up. So they had a whole range of other weird stuff going on. They had something you'd call Bigfoot. They saw a family of Bigfoot at one point, 4 of them. They would see these things 8 feet tall running across the pastures. They would see something that was invisible, you could tell it was going through the water. It would displace water and then get out, and water is dripping off of whatever the heck it was. It would go through their cattle, scare the hell out of their cattle, just divide the whole herd like something going right through it. They would smell it. They could smell it. It was this powerful musk smell. And whenever that musk smell was happening, they knew something bad was going to go on. There were huge, what we would call like crop circles, burned areas, big circles 8 feet across in a triangular pattern. There was one incident that got picked up. It's part of the reason that Bob Bigelow heard about the ranch. Something went down into the third homestead at night and dug dozens of holes, big scoops, hundreds of pounds of soil each. It was like somebody took a giant cookie cutter, lifted and used a crane to put it down there and pick up these hundreds of pounds of soil. Dozens of them appeared overnight. They were still there the first time you could still see them. The first time I was visiting. They had a UFO that came up over that same part of the property. The rancher kind of joked about it. It was pilot error that clipped the tops off of these cottonwood trees. 50 or so feet of the top of these trees were chopped off, and it was a big, like a little you left in the tops of these trees. All of this is, of course, taking a toll on the family. They're having a hard time with it. By the time the NIDS guys arrived, the story of those cookie cutter soil things, a photo was taken, it gets picked up by the local paper, then by the Associated Press, and a story is done. Zach Van Eyck, I think at Deseret News, does some stories about this UFO ranch where some weird stuff had happened. The rancher meets with him. He tells him about UFOs, and he tells him about the mutilations, but he doesn't tell him these other stories. And so when we came out with that stuff, a lot of people thought we were making it up, but we weren't. The family's messed up. By the time NIDS arrived, they're all sleeping in the same room on the floor at night for safety and comfort. The kids who'd been straight A students were on the verge of dropping out of school. The wife, who'd been vice president of the bank, had lost her job. The dad's about ready to lose it. He thinks it's government, or he's starting to suspect it's something beyond government because of the other things that happened there. He's on the phone one night with a friend of mine in Las Vegas. He's got these 3 big dogs, big tough country dogs, that are chasing one of these blue meanies, these blue orbs. This thing is floating just above the heads of these dogs who are jumping up and snapping at it, and it's leading the dogs across the pasture. And he's telling Mr. Bigelow, he says, hey, something's happening here, I gotta go. He hangs up the phone, and right at that point, this blue thing led the dogs into the brush and out of his line of sight. And then he hears these shrieks, and the dogs are gone. He goes out there and looks, and on the spot where the dogs had gone into the brush, there's these 3 greasy spots on the ground. The animals never came back. It looks like they'd been vaporized by something. That was pretty much it for the family. They'd had enough. I'll tell you another thing that had happened. The word starts to get out about the ranch before the NIDS guys arrive, and people start showing up. There's like Men in Black type people around the periphery watching. There are overflights of strange, not just UFOs, just strange craft, black helicopters, that kind of stuff, right out of UFO lore. And again, it felt like they were being watched. So one day, a guy shows up at the front gate and gets the attention of the rancher. He says, he looks like Grizzly Adams, big husky dude with a big beard. He says, I've driven hundreds of miles here. I've been drawn to this property. Can you let me meditate out here? The rancher's, are you crazy? Come on, man. And he's insisting, please, I'll leave my car here. You can drop me wherever you want, and I'll get away. I just want to do it for a couple of, half an hour or something like that. They finally talk him into it. He and the son let the guy get in their truck. They drive him to the middle homestead, my chair. And the guy is like looking at the sky and chanting and stuff, and the rancher and his kid are leaning on their truck and looking at what this crazy SOB is doing. They're getting a good chuckle out of it, and then they hear a noise. They hear a cowbell in the brush out there, ding-a-ling-a-ling. They don't have any cowbells on their cows. They're hearing this noise, and they start seeing something opaque moving through the brush. Can't quite make out a figure of it. Like, what is going on? This guy's oblivious to it. He's talking to the cosmos, and suddenly this thing comes out of the brush. It's like the movie Predator, where the camouflage technology is used. That's what this thing looks like. It bends light. It comes right up to this guy who's still got his eyes closed, and it lets out a roar right in front of his face. This roar you could hear for like a mile, like a lion. This guy just about shits his pants. Pardon me. He flies in the back. He lands on the ground. This thing goes back into the bushes. The rancher and his son come over. Are you okay? He grabs onto the rancher. He won't let go. Get me the hell out of here. This place is cursed. It's demons. And they take him to the front gate, and he's yelling and screaming the whole way. But that was the story I was told before they put me on the chair right in that spot. So I was thinking, I'm good with UFOs. Orbs, fine. No Predator, please. So there were a lot of those kinds of things that really messed with the family. When Bob Bigelow sees the story that had been picked up by Associated Press, he wastes no time. He hops on a plane, he goes to see the rancher, he brings Colin Kelleher and John Alexander with him. They hear these stories. It takes a while to win his trust. And then they said, how about if I buy the ranch? And the guy says, sold. The family, Bigelow got him a place somewhere else in the same area. The rancher was not ready to give up. This guy is tough. He doesn't want to be run off his property, so they hired him to stay on as the ranch manager. And they bought another herd of cattle. It might have been his herd of cattle, and left him out there sort of as bait to see what would come and get him. And then the NIDS scientists, NIDS is the National Institute for Discovery Science. Bob Bigelow created this organization because he was basically dissatisfied with the major UFO organizations. He'd offer them $1 million to do some quality work. It's a long story, but they screwed it up. And so he formed his own organization, and some of these people were world class, a couple of astronauts, one man who had been on the moon, 2 US senators, a really amazing group of people. That's a science advisory board. And then they had rapid response teams, people like Colin Kelleher, Eric Davis, veterinarians, trackers. If they had an outbreak of mutilation somewhere, they put them on a plane and send them there, take samples, send it to labs, try to figure this stuff out. Same thing with UFO hotspots. They're doing what science is supposed to do. And they did the same thing with the ranch. So Bigelow buys the ranch. The Science Advisory Board has a big argument about what approach to take with this place that is essentially a paranormal living lab. Part of the Science Advisory Board had suggested, well, maybe we go in soft. Maybe we go in without a lot of technology and just sort of try to interact with whatever it is psychically, or use shaman or something like that. The other guys that wanted to go in and put sensors and cameras and equipment and try to measure things the way science would do, that's the side that won out. So when they came in, they installed a trailer that was filled with equipment, all kinds of sensory gear, and they put cameras up on poles that would have a wide swath of the property so they could sort of detect and record images of weird stuff that went on. And they did what science is supposed to do. They interviewed the family. They investigated their background. They found out that they were solid citizens. They interviewed the neighbors. They interviewed the tribe. They found out, they gathered information. They checked the property for geomagnetic anomalies. They looked for any hallucinogenic plants that might inspire psychedelic images and hallucinations. Didn't find any of that. They did what science is supposed to do. They didn't have an agenda. They weren't there to prove that UFOs are real or ETs are here, because they don't know what it was, and they still don't know. So they come in like gangbusters, and the stuff starts happening to them. And they're there interacting at the same time with the rancher. They start seeing the same things, the balls of light, but it's always just out, it operates under its own rules. And it was always just outside of camera range. They had a lot of equipment malfunctions. Batteries would die, vehicles would die at the same points in the property. They'd have compasses that would just go crazy. There was a lot of really weird measurable stuff. Whatever this thing it's physical. It did physical things. It certainly did physical things to the land, to the animals, to the people who lived there. And it was non-physical. It was psychic, metaphysical, whatever you want to call it. It was all of the above. This was not just a UFO story. It was a whole range and category of really weird stuff. Among the strange things that the rancher had seen in the sky were these really big, almost like a sun, a big orange orb that would appear once in a while on the property. And he would get out his scope, and on occasion, you look through these orange orbs. They're not orbs at all, like a hole in the sky. And on the other side was another sky. And it was different. If it was daytime here, it's nighttime over there. If it was daytime there, it was nighttime here. And occasionally, he would see things flying in and out of what looked like a portal. At other times on the property, he'd see these amorphous yellowish balls of light that would appear at different times in association with phenomena. When these balls of light would appear floating over the pasture, weird stuff would happen. Creatures would appear. Well, one night, while the NIDS guys are on the property, they have an experience with one of these yellow balls of light that strongly suggested to them that the ranch is a highway, a portal, a road to other realities. We'll play the clip.
Ground zero for odd sightings was always the Middle Homestead. At nights, lights and orbs could be seen floating through the creaky old buildings. It's also where the rancher had multiple sightings of the most puzzling object, an orange glowing hole in the sky. Gorman told Kelleher and others the orange ball seemed to be a portal, and on the other side was a, quote, different sky. On at least one occasion, the rancher saw a smaller object fly out of the orange orb into the sky over his property. The exotic possibility that the ranch might be a portal to another world has occurred many times to the NIDS team, but how to prove it? In August 1996, the portal theory erupted again in a stark demonstration. The rancher and an investigator were conducting a night surveillance atop the ridges. They spotted a hovering ball of light in the Middle Homestead.
An object that was seen 4 feet off the ground, that it looked like a dull yellow light. I mean, it was innocuous.
Hovering over the road. It just appeared out of nowhere. And then it begins to expand and grow, and then it opens up into about approximately 3 foot wide opening.
They turned on the night vision equipment they had, and lo and behold, everything from a dull yellow light became like a three-dimensional, it looked like a three-dimensional tunnel that was just, you know, hovering over the ground.
Where there's a light shining coming out from within this opening. On the other side of the opening, this is just the natural background of the ranch. They see the road, they see the grass from the pasture and so forth.
Slowly, this incident unfolded where they saw this, what looked like a humanoid creature, crawling, literally elbowing his or her way through this tunnel, hovering 4 feet above the ground.
And out of this opening crawls a very large, what I understood to be an 8 foot tall black creature with a head and no neck, and a torso, arms and legs. No details or features noted on it.
There was a second witness standing right beside the other guy with the infrared technology. All he could see was a dull yellow light that had expanded to about 4 feet in diameter.
It just literally grabbed the outside edges of this opening, pulled itself through, came out, stepped onto the dirt road, and ran off into the darkness.
The creature stood up once it got out onto the ground and walked away into the darkness. I mean, can you imagine two people on the top of a cliff or a sort of a bluff 150 feet off the ground in the middle of nowhere?
And then the opening began to shrink and collapse in on itself and turned into a brilliant light that just faded away. That's a perfect description that was given by Matt Visser and John Kramer and Bob Forward and other colleagues of theirs in a physical review paper on the optical nature of wormholes.
I mean, that is not, I would say, military technology. That's some kind of a phenomena that it smacks of interdimensional phenomena.
We don't know what it is. That was one theory, that it certainly sounds like it's a portal as we understand it, but really that stuff is over my head. Those guys don't know. They're just, you know, throwing out one idea and telling you what they actually saw. They had some really harrowing encounters on the property themselves. There was, those two guys were walking, again, in the Middle Homestead at night. They have a couple of dogs with them. And the dogs suddenly go behind their legs. They're hiding, they're scared of something. And up at the top of the trees, they see this dark cloud that's floating. It's floating across the trees, getting bigger and bigger, and it stops right in front of them, and they freeze. And this thing, Eric Davis, who's a PhD physicist, brilliant man, has worked for top secret labs and things, he's frozen, and suddenly another voice comes out of him. It's not his, it's them. We're watching you. He's saying this, we're watching you. Colum is looking at him, what? And it's not him, it's somebody else speaking through him in a different voice. He snaps out of it after a couple of minutes. The cloud goes away. Eric was messed up for a couple of days, having terrible dreams, couldn't sleep. But it was a real thing. You know, there were other weird things that they investigated. So, you know, we decided when we wrote the book, we're going to put them all in, and people can sort it out themselves. The only incident that we hesitated about, that we argued about maybe leaving out, is this one. Two Native American police officers are driving through the range. I told you the whole ranch is surrounded by tribal land. There's a road, there's a paved road that leads to the dirt road that leads into the ranch. They're coming around the bend, it's nighttime, and they see two figures standing right at the bend, Their backs are to the road. The guys shine their lights over there. What are these two guys up to? Two 6-foot-tall guys in trench coats smoking cigarettes. They shine the light over to them. The guys turn around their heads. They're dogs. I know, I'm not making that up. They're dogs. They're dog faces. These Indian cops look at each other. Holy crap. They look back. Dogs are gone. Trench coat's gone. They get out of the car. Cigarettes still burning on the ground. Now, we thought, maybe we'll leave that one out. That sounds pretty crazy. But you know what? I mean, since the book came out in 2005, there's all kinds of dogman stories that we've been hearing from around the country. So we kept it in. You know, the NIDS guys tried to communicate with whatever it was. They had different experiments that they tried to talk to whatever it is, and that failed. After a while of hunting the skinwalker got tired of the game and decided, I'm going away. The activity plummeted, it went underground, and the phenomena seemed to make a statement that it was tired of this. One thing it did, well, let's play this other clip about phenomena first. This is something that Jeremy put together about the NIDS study.
In 1978, a local newspaper reported high activity in the Uinta Basin. Silver dome-shaped objects were seen, flying saucers. Some witnesses observing the display from close proximity, from underneath the craft. UFOs were buzzing the locals with jagged green lights like fire. Nothing really changes. It's constant. The phenomenon is engaging people. It's a pattern of close encounters. It's commonplace. People hunt the cause. Scientists investigate the carnage. The NIDS team tried to quantify the performances. They created control studies for plant growth. They monitored the environment. They calculated the variables. They analyzed every event. But mostly, they waited for the phenomenon to express itself. And the phenomenon seemed to toy with them, to play games with them. Silence followed by dramatic displays of control. It did what it wanted. It does what it wants. To anybody.
That's kind of an interesting image there. It was something that was picked up on the cameras. They had this bank of recording equipment on these cameras that were recorded 24 hours a day, and occasionally they'd see something, it'd be a light in a sea of inky darkness, not really worth all that much. That looked like the Twin Towers that just appeared out there, and then it was gone. It was frustrating for the NIDS guys. The activity goes underground, and then it makes a couple of statements, sort of like bon voyage, grand farewell. The cameras that are up on these poles have a wide view. There are 3 of the poles and cameras on all of them. And down the side, this is the new version, but when NIDS was there, they had these plastic covers for the wires. And the plastic covers were wrapped up with several layers of duct tape. So one day, the camera goes out. One of these cameras goes out, and they go look at it, and it's torn to pieces. It's just ripped to shreds. The wires are ripped out. The plastic covering is gone, and all the tape is gone as well. Something had really just shredded it. So they realize, aha, we've got the other cameras. They can see this. Let's go back. We'll back time it. When this camera went out, we'll look at the other cameras and see what went up that pole and tore it up. And they get the cameras back and look at it. And whatever did it was invisible. There's nothing there. Can't really make out the stuff flying around. When they took it back and analyzed it, months later, they were able to see a little tiny blue light buzzing around the camera when it got ripped to shreds. It was just like this from the phenomena. Get out of here, you're not welcome. They had one other incident that we'll talk about, maybe we'll do it tomorrow, about an ice circle that was kind of also a giveaway. So NIDS, the activity stops. They don't really have any other places that are hot spots. NIDS itself goes underground. Bob Bigelow dissolved it about 2004. And they don't really have any conclusions about the ranch. They can't publish a paper about it. Who's going to publish it? What would they say? They don't know what this was. How do you describe it? All these different activities. It's almost as if weird on purpose so that nobody would take it seriously. But that wasn't the end of the study. In 2007, a guy from the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, reads the book. He contacts Mr. Bigelow and says, I'd like to go to the ranch. I think there's something there for us to look at. He goes to the ranch. He has an experience. He's not there 15 minutes, and he sees this weird ball of light in the living room where he's talking to the ranch lady, the wife, who's the caretaker. He doesn't say anything at the time, goes back to Washington, meets with Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, guy that I introduced to the UFO topic some years ago, and he's secretly been a UFO buff for the last 30 years or so. He had met with Bigelow. He had talked to other senators about his interest. This DIA guy had proposed, let's do a study. Let's study something more than just lights in the sky, shapes and saucers and things of that sort. Let's look at something bigger. Because it looks like, from the experiences of the ranch, that these things are somehow interconnected. Harry Reid goes to some colleagues, gets the money for it, they put it out to bid. Bigelow Aerospace, of course, bids on it. The same people who had worked on NIDS are a lot of the folks who work on this program, and they set up a study in secret. And that study focused on Skinwalker Ranch. And they covered a lot of ground, and they talked to new witnesses and dug up new evidence and created massive reports, as well as a database that is gigantic, that we may never see. Some of the stuff that I did last night, the story, is material that was involved with that, but it's a lot of, hundreds of FOIA requests have been filed for these reports, but I'm not sure that they're ever going to be released. However, we do know quite a bit about what they learned, and we do know that they took this seriously, and that the idea that these various phenomena, UFOs, Bigfoot, poltergeists, crop circles, cattle mutilations, invisible beings, orbs, all that stuff, is it related? I can tell you it's all there. I don't know if this is trying to send us a message that maybe it is all somehow related, or it is these same phenomena taking different shapes and sizes and appearing to us at different times, or, it just happens to be a paranormal highway where all this stuff intersects. We don't know. The ATIP study that was underway in the Pentagon that Lou Elizondo ran focused entirely on UFOs, nuts and bolts craft, because that's the kind of thing that the military is willing to support. If it's a perceived threat to ships and planes and nuclear weapons, all right, we'll look into that. But this wow stuff, the program was killed in large part because people inside the Pentagon and DIA, number one, were worried that the story would get out, which of course it did, and number two, that it was satanic, that it's demonic. Maybe it is demonic, but does studying it and trying to figure it out invoke it? That's like saying, we don't want to mention the word skinwalker because it might come into our lives. But that's true, and it happened. Answers, I guess, are hard to find. The property, Bigelow sold the property in 2016. That's what it looks like now. They installed new gates. There's a new owner who doesn't want his identity known. That's him. We got him to talk to us a little bit. Jeremy got him to talk for the camera. He's trying to carry on the study, to revive the study, and once again, there's been a big spike in activity. I say that reluctantly because whenever I've said that before, it causes all kinds of YouTube investigators to go ahead and go make their own Skinwalker movie, and they go on the property, and they drink beer, and they peer in the window at night and take flash photos, and they take souvenirs. One guy tore the whole gate off. This is some of the security that was following us around the last time we visited. So I guess I'll wrap it up and let you ask some questions, but we don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer. How does all this stuff fit together? Is it ET or alien? Well, it's not exactly what we think of as ET. Is it the military? Maybe, some of it. It could be the military doing some psychological exercise. Did the military take that calf, and carve it up and dump it back there? Did the military, did commandos get into the bathroom and take the towel and the hairbrush? Imagine giving that order. Go take her hairbrush and put it in the freezer. The military didn't do all this stuff. This stuff has been going on for 250 years. Maybe they're doing it now, but they didn't start it. So that's not an explanation. Interdimensional? I don't know. I don't know. Is it all related? It seems like we got a learning curve here, that it's telling us that it is somehow related, that reality isn't what it used to be, that it's much more wondrous and mysterious than we might imagine, and we need to start thinking about it in those kinds of terms. At least I hope that's what it is, as opposed to just alien teenagers just messing with us. I know that there is a Native American connection. There's a Native American connection to the other hotspots that I mentioned before, but I don't really understand it. I think they seem to have a better grasp of this and are more comfortable with it than we are, than the rest of the culture. But getting them to open up has been tough. We have made progress recently, and you'll be able to see it when the film comes out. But you know, the NIDS guys did what they're supposed to do. And that's what Jeremy and I have been trying to do as well, is to, you know, investigate the unexplained, not to explain the uninvestigated. Thank you. You want to chat? Okay, what's on your mind?
There's a lot of
How's
talk
this
about
work?
that gate actually being on a public road and it being unlawful, like in the first place. And I know they had tried to get the law changed so the road was considered private and make the gate legit, but I don't know if anything happened about that. Do you know any more about this?
Yes. I think officially that was a public access road, even when Bigelow owned it, but he put up a gate and wouldn't let people in and got away with it. When the property transferred in 2016, the whole argument about whether the gate was public or not started up again. The owner got a stay while he went to the county commission and I think court as well. And he's a wealthy guy, so I think he managed to convince them that it needs to remain private. So it has been officially changed, and it is private property, not a public access anymore. So public. I think the idea that the public could use that road to go through Skinwalker Ranch anytime it wanted to terrified the owner for good reason, so he got it changed.
Thank you.
Sure.
George, one of the things that I really wonder about, that I wonder if it kind of ties all of this together, is the idea of a multiverse, and that there's a universe that could be just beside us right here, and the difference between us and them is that their atoms vibrate at a different frequency. And if those atoms vibrate at our frequency, they can skip over into our universe and then vibrate at that frequency and go back. So that's one of the things I wonder about. Science, and it seems like the physicists and scientists keep coming back to that. With mathematics, they can't get away from that idea.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. We wrote about it in the book, is that one time the multiverse idea was pretty exotic and crazy, and now it's cutting edge stuff. I mean, I would think that cosmologists, most of them now accept that that is a distinct possibility. It's consistent with string theory, that there is other realities. You know, we say to ourselves, in that context, we say to ourselves, we're all ready for the truth. We want to know what's going on. And we're thinking of that in the context of UFOs. Flying saucers are here from other planets. And I remember the first time I interviewed Dr. Jacques Vallée, he had said, I'm going to be really disappointed if the ultimate answer to the UFO mystery is merely ETs coming here from other planets to visit us occasionally, because the evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests we're in the middle of some other intelligence, whether that's dimensional, it's an ultra-terrestrial or crypto-terrestrial or whatever you want to call it. The idea is that we live among them. They're here, they can interject themselves into our reality at will, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, people may be ready for truth about flying saucers, that they're ETs from other planets, but I am, after dealing with the ranch for more than 20 years, I'm not sure we're ready for this other discussion of reality. The idea that there is another intelligence that sees everything, it knows what you think, It knows what you're going to do beforehand. It sees you when you're sleeping, when you're in the shower. People would freak out, I think. I think the general public, this audience excluded, I guess you're a general public once in a while, but I think people who are here or curious enough to hear this could handle it. But I think a big, large swaths of the population would have trouble with it. Maybe that is the answer, the multiverse, extra dimensionals. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is the third homestead also just abandoned? How long has it been since people lived there? How many things happen there? Do things come from there or go to there? What's the deal with the third homestead?
It is abandoned. It is, has been abandoned, I think it was built in the 1920s, so it's been empty since maybe the 1950s. The current owner of the ranch has had a team of historians that have looked back into the records and have located the family members of the people who built that third homestead. The third homestead was actually the first one. It's the smallest, and then the second one, and then the current house is the youngest. But the people who live there have there's a great family story about what we'd call a Men in Black type guy showing up in the middle of a snowstorm, being invited in. He was like really weird, wearing really weird clothes from the future. And then they said, do we need to give you a ride to town? No, I'm fine. And he walks out, they open the door, and he's gone. He's gone. And then the Myers family that have made statements since the book came out. We never had any problem. We didn't install all those locks. We didn't have guard dogs. We never saw anything. The people around them in their own family, the neighbors who knew them, said they did, in fact, have experiences. They just didn't want to deal with it anymore and didn't want to talk about it. And while they were there, they seemingly came to an accommodation with whatever it is. The same is true for the husband and wife who live on the ranch now. They were the caretakers for a couple of years under Bob Bigelow, and they have stayed on with the new owner. And they see stuff all the time. They don't talk about it, and it doesn't seem to bother them too much. There is an incident in their past where it seems to have caused some physical harm, but they've moved on from it. So whatever this thing is, you can learn to live with it. And it shows itself to you. It sets the rules. One other thing I want to mention is that what's on the ranch doesn't stay on the ranch. It follows people. The agents who were part of the study conducted for the DIA, who were on the property, all had experiences. And it seemed like people who brought guns on the property, the tough folks, commando types, who these were, they all had experiences there, and it followed them home. And it's 7 or 8 years later, it's still messing with them now. And it shows itself to family members, scares the hell out of people. Creatures appear, stuff flies around the room, wine bottles break on the wall, that kind of stuff has happened to them and is ongoing. And it happened to the Gormans when they moved out of the area. They moved to Idaho, and it followed them for a while too. So it's not to be trifled with. I know we're sitting here talking about it, and it's kind of fun, but it's spooky. And it's weird, and we don't know what its priorities or goals are. We can only guess. You know?
Did you do any excavation of the ground, or anybody else dig down to see if there was an ancient foundation of some type?
Not to my knowledge. There were discussions of that, and then it never went anywhere. There were discussions about getting ground-penetrating radar to look in a couple of, it's 480 acres, it's a big ranch. But there's one particular area. Mr. Bigelow, John Alexander, and Hal Putoff, who was an advisor to the Science Advisory Board, had been involved with the remote viewing program, knew all these remote viewers, the ones that really know their stuff and had worked for CIA and the Pentagon. And they got a couple of those guys to take a look at it, and they all seemed to look at the same place. In fact, I engaged a team of remote viewers to take a look at the property. They all looked at the same place. The team that I got involved, they saw military folks underground and with banks of equipment. The one remote viewer, the best remote viewer in the world, identified a particular part of the ranch in the third homestead that was he didn't know what it was, but it was dark. And he suggested if you're going to dig there. To my knowledge, that never happened, and they did not use ground-penetrating radar, but the new owner may.
Thank you.
Sure.
They're moving past the idea of nuts and bolts analysis of UFO propulsion and moving ahead to the idea of consciousness being an interactive factor in propelling UFOs, and considering the fact that every time we go to sleep at night, our consciousness leaves.
The premise being this is not just lights in the sky and craft, this is something else. That was the reason that study, the ALSAP program, the BASS study, was so amazing, because it wasn't just looking at flying saucers and nuts and bolts craft. It was created to look at, is there an interaction with these other phenomena? And that's an amazing thing. And it was threatening to people. It made them uncomfortable. But the fact is, that's what it's probably going to take. You need to look at the big picture. That's what this study was, the NID study was about. It's what the BASS study was about.
Yes. 2016, I was here, and there was a couple of guys called the Paranormal Rangers, and they were Navajo federal agents, John Dover and Stan Milford. Have you spoke with them or had any kind of a collaborative
I have not.
sort of thing?
You know, I was amazed because when we started working on the book, Colum and I had reached out to a number of tribes, including the Navajo, the tribal council, tribal historians, and nobody wanted to talk to us about skinwalker stuff. We ended up getting Anglo professors, university professors, who had studied native cultures who were willing to share with us their impressions. And then it's been 7 or 8 years, all of a sudden the Navajo police officers come out, they're on television talking about it. They deal with skinwalker stuff, Bigfoot stuff, witches, and they take it seriously because it is serious to their constituents. So they go out on those kind of calls. I'd love to interact with the Navajo officers, and I hope I get a chance. If somebody here knows them, I'd love to have a phone number. I'll call them.
You have a unique position in that you're involved as a really successful mass communicator and also have this really respected foot in UFO and paranormal. And I've often wondered, what's the justification for greater media not to pick up and communicate the things that you're communicating, especially with what you're saying is coming out from this extended research? So what do you hear from your cohorts in greater media as how can they justify turning a blind eye to all of this information?
It's pretty much the same it's always been, is that it's the giggle factor. I mean, the reason that the Pentagon canceled that study, same thing. Nobody wants to be, Chris Mellon wrote a Washington Post op-ed piece about, nobody wants to be the alien guy in the Pentagon. It does no good. Even now, after the tic-tac and all this stuff has come out, pilots don't want to report this. It does not help their careers. And the same is true in my line of work. I get away with it because I've been at it a long time, and had a certain amount of credibility before I became the alien guy, but I've caught nothing but grief about it ever since. And I think it's a shame because there are legitimate things you can write about, that you can have an honest inquiry and you can try to separate wheat from chaff and boil it down and do good news stories. The same way I've always approached it the same way I would any news story, but it's the giggle factor. It keeps people from getting into it. I am amazed that the New York Times did that story. Now they screwed it up a little bit, but it'll be fixed. It'll be sorted out. But I thought that would change the media environment, and for a while it did. Suddenly, New York Times does the story, Politico does it, Washington Post does it, the New Yorker magazine. Some of them are dumping on the other media because they got scooped. That comes with the territory, but there was a big flurry. Fox News Tucker Carlson had all these guys on his show multiple times, CNN, MSNBC even, and so I had high hopes that because the New York Times had done it, it would make it acceptable for other media to do that. And I think there might be some residual effect for that right now. I think it may have opened up a door for other people to pursue this, serious journalists to report it accurately. I'm hopeful. But, if you're asking why it hasn't happened over the years, it's because of the giggle factor.
Thank you.
Ridicule. My wall at home has the editorial cartoons that have been drawn about me over the years by our state's largest newspaper. Every time somebody's pissed off at me about something, they bring up UFO stuff, you know. I do a story about vice cops being crooked. That's the UFO guy. That's all right. And they had these cartoons. One had me with a butterfly net chasing a flying saucer. The other one was called The Marshmallow Head Chronicles. And it had two E.T. hitmen had come to Earth to rub me out. And they had ray guns, and they're standing at a gas station looking at these two gas pumps. Of course they are Earthmen, but which one is George Knapp, they said. I thought it was funny. I'm in a public position. I have a sense of humor, so I got the originals. They're on my wall. But, we had these columns when the first series about Bob Lazar that we did back in '89 and then in 1990. And it drove my colleagues in journalism crazy because of all the public attention that it got. It drove them crazy. So they would take pot shots every chance they got. They had a column called "They Were Kidnapped by Aliens," and it was about alien abduction stories and the medical experiments that are done, and they dubbed me a grand mullah in the Church of Cosmic Proctology. And they had another column, the media columnist, saying, boy, people are rushing home at night to see George Knapp stories. They can't wait to get there, not because they're interested in UFOs, but because they want to be there when he finally goes bull goose loony on the air. So it comes with the territory. I'm all right with it. What bothers me is the people making those jokes and the columnists writing that stuff have never done one whit of the work. They haven't sat out in Area 51 night after night looking in the sky, dodging the security patrols. They haven't read the books, haven't interviewed the witnesses, haven't come to events like this. And when they do come to events like this, they write the same stories. Look at the people in the funny hats and the funny shirts and the goofy books that they're selling, and they have fun. And they E.T. phone home and where's Elvis, and the same jokes that every reporter has ever covered have told. Gets old.
Hey, George, thanks so much for coming. I love your work. Me and my friend, we actually went to Vernal, Utah, where the Skinwalker Ranch was in 2016. We had some vacation time, wanted to go out there, see what it was like. Beautiful place.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things that we figured out was the fracking, the horrible fracking stories and all the stillborn births that were happening in the area, which was a huge story. Rolling Stones covered it. But one of the biggest things we found by talking to some of the locals at the bars, some of them were definitely native, was the fight over the Indian water rights, the reservation water rights that the Indians had. Apparently treaties had been annulled, agreements had been gone back on, and some were even suggesting that there was a curse put on the whites that had taken over that land because of that. Can you comment on that, or have you heard that at all?
I know that the Utes, like pretty much every other indigenous tribe, have been screwed over multiple times, and treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on. I'm not up on the current water battles, but the lands that they have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and occasionally they've expanded again, but there are clashes, cultural clashes, and people take advantage of them every chance they get. I don't know about the curse on the water. It wouldn't surprise me, though.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
So considering the severity of the cattle mutilations and the fact that it sounds like quite a few dogs were killed, why do you think an alien presence and or spirits or whatever it is wouldn't do the same harm to humans, people on the ranch, that they are taking their time and toying with on this land?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that we've pondered for a long time, is why didn't they carve up people?
Right.
And they didn't. I know there are stories about it, that people died out there and everything, but they did not. Whatever this intelligence is, it seemingly differentiates between us and other species. It didn't kill any humans, but it killed dogs, cats, cows. It cut up horses. It mutilated skunks and other creatures out there. It messed with birds. It draws a line somewhere. I guess I'm glad that no people have been carved up, but I think it looks at what we do to animals and figure it must be okay.
I was wondering that about the cattle especially. I mean, we eat the cattle,
Yeah.
and they had just finished tagging the cattle.
There's nothing aliens have done to cattle that we haven't done 10 times over, so.
But it does seem a tiny bit egotistical that they are differentiating humans, which is interesting.
Well, I think they have an interest in us.
Yeah.
I hope it's a hopeful interest that they hope to bring us along and we can join the cosmic community at some point and we'd be ready for it, or not ready now.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
Are you aware of any efforts underway amongst the from within the Ute tribe and the Navajo Nation to make any amends from what I'm seeing might be some of the source of this conflict that's focused on Skinwalker Ranch?
Not that I know of. They're kind of afraid of the place. They don't mess with it. You know, I know that there have been tribal members that have worked on the property over the years, but in general they leave it alone, and it's very difficult to pierce the veil and get them to talk about it. Jeremy and I have made some progress over the last year. We've been allowed on tribal property that was never open to us before. This place called Dark Canyon, which is where Skinwalker Ridge is the path of the Skinwalker. Dark Canyon is where it supposedly lives, and they let us go in there with cameras and have been very accommodating. We've talked to some of their police officers who have had, I told you about the hitchhiker effect. Some of those officers have had those experiences themselves, and so they are keenly aware of the phenomena. I don't think they have any interest in trying to reach an accommodation with what's on the ranch, because it's everywhere in the Uinta Basin. It's not just there, it's everywhere. It just happens to be the Skinwalker Ranch is the place that was studied the most. It's an interesting experiment that the NIDS guys discussed during the study. Could you go out, throw a dart in a map, and then go there and intensely study it and find the same kind of stuff, the same kind of stories and experiences everywhere? If you just looked hard enough, maybe you could. I don't know. But no, as far as I know, the Utes are not trying to reach an accommodation with the ranch.
I was reading some reports about Skinwalker Ranch. The people who were there were having abduction experiences that you really didn't touch on very much. At one point, my understanding is the Greys that were visiting often, one of their arms got chopped off and they were looking into that. Do you have any insight on that at all?
That didn't happen. Okay. If it did, it's been kept real secret. I don't remember them ever seeing any Greys there. And as far as the abduction experiences, none of the ranch family that we're talking about had those experiences. There are a lot of weird stuff, and there's some missing time. And like I said, they had that scoop marks on their thumbs that are sometimes indicative of an abduction. Right. No conscious memories of an abduction. There was one for the family next door. And the story is that these two teenage girls are coming home at night. They drive right past their house, down, which is on the same road, that dirt road that leads to the ranch. Mm-hmm. They drive past their own property toward the ranch, and there's a police car behind them, or what they think is a police car because of the flashing red and blue lights. Mm-hmm. And they keep on going. The next thing they know, they're in their car up on Skinwalker Ridge. There's no road up there. It's the next morning. It wasn't a cop car behind them. That's the only abduction experience that I've ever heard directly. But okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. I had a question about, have you talked to Bob Lazar about Skinwalker Ranch? And if so, what's his opinion?
I've shared with him some of these stories, and Jeremy has been working on a project with Bob over the last couple of months and has told him some of it. He has enough faith in us to know that there must be something to it or we wouldn't still be working on it, but it's not his deal. He's totally focused on his business and his wife and his life in Michigan, and as we have said, I have said many times in public presentations, he'd just as soon leave all this stuff behind. Jeremy might be the person to ask that. If you're around, he's had more direct contact with Bob in the last couple of months on this subject. So ask him.
Hi. At the beginning of your presentation, I think you were touching on the previous family who put a bunch of heavy-duty locks on one of the houses, and I think your wording was to either keep something out or keep something in. And I don't think you ever circled back to that. I was just curious what that was about.
Well, they were curious about why there'd be locks on both sides of the doors, why there were locks on both sides of the doors inside, and then when they were there, in the plethora of things, of weird stuff that was happening, is doors opening and closing on their own, and things coming in and out. So the people who had been there before were trying to keep something out, or trying to protect themselves, and had locks all over the place. And everyone who's lived there since has had the same experience. Doors and windows opening up, and heavy footsteps outside and inside, and I don't think you're going to stop them with locks, but that was what they tried.
Two-part question. Harry Reid's infamous black eye, anything to do with this?
No.
Nothing?
No, I've known Harry Reid since 1982.
You can ask your own, I mean, I'll ask my own.
And I believe the story that he told, that he had an accident there. He's, right now, by the way, he had surgery on Monday. On May 2nd, I should tell you that I was on my way to his home in Henderson with another guy to talk about this subject. He wanted a debrief because he's actively trying to move something forward using what influence he has left to reignite a study, not only of UFOs, but the other surrounding phenomena. What Harry Reid did, when the story eventually comes out about how far he went to initiate this program and to protect it, I think you're gonna, I don't know if you like Harry Reid or not, but I think you'll be impressed by how many times he went to bat for it. Right now, May 2nd, I was on my way to his house, and he calls me and says, we're canceling the meeting. I just came from the doctor, and it was a routine screening, and they found something. So we'll have to reschedule it. And then that day, he had an MRI, and they found cancer on his pancreas. Now, pancreatic cancer is pretty bad. So Monday, he had surgery. He's at Johns Hopkins University. If you've read about pancreatic cancer, you know what the chances are. But I'm hoping that he hangs on and bounces back, because he'd be a valuable ally in trying to get this thing going again. The Pentagon, for all the talk about leaking this and leaking that, and they want disclosure and acclamation, they are not our friends on this issue, and they don't want this study, and they don't want documents to be released. If any of you have filed FOIAs to try to get some of this information that I'm talking about, then you know what the reaction has been. They don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to deal with it, and it's myopic and foolish, because these things are real. They're here. They're they're demonstrating technological superiority over our most advanced systems and sensors, and somebody needs to find out how these things work and whether we can build them, and to make damn sure it's not the Russians or Chinese or Iranians or North Koreans that are building them first.
I'm wondering whether you see a possible intersection between the phenomena that is seemingly represented by this location and a phenomenon that you also report vis-a-vis a mutual acquaintance of ours, David Paulides.
Maybe. Maybe. And I wanted to tell Dave this before I told it to an audience, but yeah, that question has come up, whether there is a connection between the paranormal type stuff, poltergeist stuff, weird phenomena that the ranch had experienced, and the disappearances of people in national parks and national forests. And the answer I was given is maybe. That's kind of a chilling little thought there, but maybe. And I don't know how far somebody has looked into that, but I'm hoping to get more information about it, and I'll let you know. I'll let him know.
Yeah, there's seemingly something the same, yet obviously not the same, but sort of the same.
Yeah.
Enigmatic intelligence.
I mean, those people disappear, and most of them don't come back. That didn't happen on the ranch.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it can't happen there. And maybe it's more than one. It's more than one intelligence. Maybe we're the cosmic drive-in movie theater. We're so weird and strange that they come from all over the place and other dimensions to check us out. And they have different motives and different interests. Don't know. It sure is fun to speculate and pursue it, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, George. I noticed after the New York Times article came out, the following weeks, you had some stories where you had been interviewing Luis Elizondo. And I noticed that in the interviews, it appears it was from the same interview. He was in the same clothes, it was the same location. And each time it clarified something from the New York Times article. So I'm curious, and you had kind of mentioned that there's more clarification coming. Is some of that coming from that interview session? Like, do you have more stories coming from that time?
I hope so. I mean, we did a really long interview. Here's the deal on this New York Times story, and I haven't said this before, so I'm aware of the BASS study and the OSAP and ATIP and all that stuff because I was allowed to be a fly on the wall while that stuff was underway, but I couldn't tell anybody about it. So when the word comes out, Lou Elizondo comes forward with Tom DeLonge in October. Great, good, that's moving forward, that's great. It's out of the closet a little bit. And then, so I did some stories about it, and I have more that I had planned to do, and then I am told the New York Times is gonna break this thing. And I called up all of the people who were involved in this. Well, why does the New York Times get to break it? I've been sitting on this thing for 5 or 6 years, I want to do the story. And they implored me, they said that the New York Times, if somebody else breaks it before they do, that they'll just cancel it. And they implored me that if I would hold off, I would get access to certain things and interviews. It was important for the New York Times to do it because, and they put this as gently as they could, I am not the New York Times, and I would heartily agree with them on that. So it was important for the Times to break it so that it changed the media environment so that other news organizations would go ahead and pursue it, and that's how it worked out. So yeah, I've had lengthy interviews with Senator Reid and Lou and other people, and we've parsed it out. It's not part of some big scheme where I'm working with the government. It's that I work for KLAS TV. My audience, with all due respect, is the TV viewers in Las Vegas. So that's who I write for. I don't write for ufologists, I write for them. And we have what we call sweeps periods, of the year when ratings really count, when my employer counts on me to produce stories that are of great interest to the general public so that we can make money on advertising. So some will see a plot in this that I'm just dishing it out a little piece at a time as part of the evil cabal government or something, or acclamation. I see it as I'm doing my job for my employer and for the viewers of Las Vegas. So I've spread out some stories in November, December, February, April, and now in May, and there will be more. Hey everybody, thank you very much.